Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, follow it, share it, give it a big fat review. You can also follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates about upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee. Stop by their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's in Big Y on Memorial Drive, or stop by MetroJeep.com and make it Metro. And then drive home in your new Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast. Resistance is useless.
When I was in college, I had a roommate named Dave. Now, Dave worked at a very trendy record store and had access to all kinds of music that without him and his employer, I might not have discovered on my own. Or if I did, it would have come many years later. Among the many things that Dave introduced me to at the time was the music of the Cocteau Twins, a Scottish trio whose music, I'm going to try not to go overboard here, was life-changing. The music of the Cocteau Twins was some of the most gorgeous music that I had ever heard, and it connected to me in a way that still, to this day, holds a very special place in my life. For some, the Cocteau Twins were the starting point for what is now known as dream pop or shoegaze. I personally find those genre-grabbing labels to be a little inadequate because, to me, the Cocteau Twins represented so much more than that. You only have to listen to the vocals of Elizabeth Fraser on albums like Heaven or Las Vegas, Victoria Land, Treasure, or anything else for that matter to understand this isn't just another new wave band that was all the rage in the 80s. I'll go so far as to say that her voice is perhaps one of the most mysteriously beautiful things in recorded history. Again, I don't want to go overboard here, but she is my favorite female vocalist of all time. And that magical voice, coupled with the stunning talents of her partner at the time, guitarist Robin Guthrie, and bass player Simon Raymonde, helped put the Cocteau Twins in a class all by themselves. They are an untouchable, legendary entity that I have been crazy about for the last 40-plus years. And if we were only going to talk about the Cocteau Twins today, that would almost be good enough for me. But there's so much more to this story. It's a story that's just been told in an amazing new memoir written by Cocteau Twins bass player Simon Raymonde, entitled In One Ear, Cocteau Twins, Ivor and Me. This is a fascinating book that not only looks at Simon's time with Guthrie and Fraser, it also looks at the complicated relationship with his father, Ivor Raymonde, the legendary British musician, arranger, songwriter, and actor whose credits include working with Dusty Springfield, David Bowie, Roy Orbison, Cat Stevens, the Bay City Rollers, and literally hundreds more. On top of that, Simon also talks at length about his own music, which is also outstanding, but also about Bella Union Records, a successful record label that he originally started with Robin Guthrie but now runs on his own. And over the last couple of years, I've had the chance to talk to a handful of bands on the Bella Union label, including both Congratulations and Deary, who have both released music this year. But Bella Union has also released music from the Flaming Lips, Fleet Foxes, Beach House, John Grant, Patti Smith, and The Fall. It's a really cool, artist-friendly label that's doing things that other record labels simply refuse to do, and that's pretty damn amazing. But there's another part to this story that Robin discusses at the very beginning of the book. It's a story that has very little to do with music itself, but a story that has everything to do with his health and a condition that has stripped him of his hearing in one ear, and how he's adapted to that in spite of having maintained a long and successful career in music. It's a truly remarkable story. To say that it's an honor to speak with Simon Raymonde is putting it mildly. And so to talk about all of that is my guest today, Simon Raymonde from the Cocteau Twins and Bella Union Records on Baxie's Musical Podcast. First things first, I really enjoyed reading the book. The Cocteau Twins always seem to be, I don't know, somewhat mysterious to me. I've been a fan since the mid 80s. And one of the reasons that I was so excited to read the book was because of how much I love the band. But the rest of the book is equally as interesting as anything else. And the question I had is, what made you decide to write the book and tell this story now?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have been asking me for ages, like, write a book, you've done so many cool things. And I kind of thought, have I? No, I didn't really sort of think my life was particularly special, because you just live it. I'm too busy living it to really stop and think about what it is. So when I kind of did stop, I suppose maybe COVID was the first moment where all of us sort of stopped and took a breath. And, that's actually when I started to make music again, which was a revelation in itself. But maybe that period, just self-reflection a little bit and looking back and then realizing, actually that was actually pretty interesting. And maybe I do have a story in there. But I didn't honestly really know until I started writing it, and then more stuff would come, and then I'd remember more things, and then I'd think, yeah, maybe there is a book in here somewhere. And I found someone who's a literary agent. I think that was the sort of key to it. Who then found me a publisher, who was really supportive and encouraged me. And when I sent him things, he'd be, yeah, it's brilliant, it's great, don't
Yeah.
stop, just keep doing it. And I had a few false starts along the way. Certainly thought I'd finished when I certainly hadn't finished, and I suppose every new writer has to go through these sort of trials and tribulations when they're trying to get it all down. But
Of
for the
course.
most part, I found it really enjoyable.
Yeah, the name of the book is In One Ear, the Cocteau Twins, Ivor and Me. And there's a certain cleverness in the title, and you begin the book right away talking about why that's so compelling. There's an amazing part to this story that begins with the diagnosis of your brain tumor, and specifically how it was diagnosed and what it's affected. Obviously, it's affected your hearing, and how you chose to deal with it. And the fact that you opened up the story with it was like really engaging. It's like you're like, I wanted to know, okay, how's he dealing with this? Is he okay? How is he managing? And it's really fascinating with how you have adapted to that. Give me a little bit of insight into being diagnosed with this tumor.
Yeah, well, I mean, it came out of the blue. I mean, as I say in the first chapter of the book, really. I mean, I thought it was a good place to start because it is a bit of a oh wow, because I'd never really talked about it before. So I thought, well, it is a really significant thing that's happened in my life to me personally, and in a way, it's sort of, I suppose, in terms of the book, it's a vehicle by which I can sort of give a little bit about who I am, and then kind of go backwards and forwards in time with the events that I've had to deal with in the book. So I didn't know there was anything wrong with me at all. I literally just lost my hearing one day in the studio, in the same way that when you go swimming and you think you've got water in your ear and you just sort of stick your finger in your ear and wiggle it around, and then some water pops out and your ear clears. I thought that was sort of what was going on. And then it didn't clear. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, maybe I've got an ear infection or a cold or something. But I was right in the middle of producing a record in Brighton, ironically, where I now live. So I didn't do anything about it for a few weeks. And then eventually went and saw somebody at the doctor's, and the doctor said, okay, I don't know what it is, but it's not an ear infection. Maybe you should go and have a hearing test. So I was like, okay, weird, I will. So I went and had a hearing test, and they said, okay, you need to have an MRI scan this afternoon, which I thought, okay, that's weird. It usually takes about 3 months to get an MRI scan in the UK, because the NHS is so under pressure. So I knew that was probably something not good if they were asking me to have an MRI scan so quick. And then, yeah, I was diagnosed that afternoon and offered the option of having a big hole drilled in the side of my head and having the tumor removed by the evening. And it was all just so shocking to me and so like kind of overwhelming that I just said no at the time, even though I could easily have just said yes, because the guy who was saying he would do the operation was like the eminent professor in the whole of the UK for doing this kind of surgery. So I suppose on one hand, I should have taken his advice, but I'm glad I didn't, because I just went home and sat on the internet for a couple of weeks and just read up all about this tumor that I had now sitting in my brain, and learnt all about it and what my options were. And I went down a completely different route of treatment, which was in fact not having any treatment at all.
Well, I mean, as someone whose career has revolved around music, where your hearing is such an important part of your life, the idea that you're now faced with like permanent hearing loss and then trying to decide, well, what should I do about it? Yeah, as you're explaining it, it makes total sense why you wouldn't have done something about it. But is this the kind of condition where at some point you may need to have a surgical procedure, or is that really not what you're facing?
Well, that's a great question, and I mean, I still probably don't know the right answer to that because I think from reading the different stories of people that have had it, some people have had the operation, some people haven't, some people have it and have an unsuccessful operation. Where my fear, of course, was when the guy explained it to me, as I say in the book, we'll take it out, and there's 94% or something chance of it working. And I said, oh, those odds are terrible. And he was like, no, they're great. And I went, well, no, because that means 6 out of 100 people don't succeed, don't come through it. And I don't want to be one of those 6. So that's why I went home and just said, I need to think about it. And he was like, well, I'm only here today. I won't be here tomorrow, so once or lifetime, it's a now or never opportunity. So I said, well, I'll just take my chances. Eventually found this other person who had a completely flip view of this tumor and said, listen, it's a very slow growing tumor. It could sit in your brain and do next to nothing for the rest of your life, and you can live completely unaware that it's even there, really, apart from the hearing thing. Or next week it could grow and you could lose all the feeling in your right side and it start affecting other nerves in your body. I mean, I just don't know, but it's up to you to have a decision about it. And if you do start to feel a bit weird, or start to lose your balance, then come in and we can do a different kind of we can blast it with fractionated radiotherapy, it's called, where they put this helmet on your head and they just blast doses of radiation at it and break it up, and it's 100% successful. So I'm like, oh, well, actually, that sounds cool. Let's go with that. And that's the last time I mean, obviously, I have MRI scans constantly. I'm at the point now where I was having them twice every year, 3 times every year, then twice a year. Now it's down to once a year. And I think it'll probably be down to once every 2 years very soon, because it doesn't grow much. It's very, very slow growing, and it hasn't affected my life in any way, really, other than not being able to hear anything.
But the way you presented it in the book was really fascinating, and there's so many aspects of the story and about the book that I thought were really, really interesting. And I think one of the more interesting parts is the relationship with your father, Ivor Raymonde, whose career in music is so profound that when you dig into that rabbit hole, you say, "Oh, he did that too."
Yes.
I think like a lot of father and son relationships, you don't always get the sense of who your father is until you're later in life and you've had some experience of your own to really kind of understand who your father is. But in some cases, like yourself, you don't always get that opportunity to do it until it's too late. Talk about that for a moment. I mean, your father casts a pretty big shadow in your life, but remarkably, the two of you spoke very little about music when he was alive.
Yes, I mean, I suppose we're from different generations, obviously, and the father-son relationship of the sort of 70s and 80s, when I was at that kind of in those teenage years, was never kind of like kids are now. With like my sons are like my best friends. We like talk to each other all the time, and we hug, and we have that kind of super friendly relationship. I see them all the time. I didn't have that relationship with my dad because that wasn't the kind of relationship kids had with their parents back then. It wasn't touchy-feely. It wasn't really, well, mine wasn't anyway. I don't know what other people's were, but it was sort of a far-off, distant respect. He was lovely. He was a great guy, but I just didn't know him. Do you know what I mean? I just didn't know him. And I was at boarding school for like 6, 7 years. So, I mean, I barely saw him for a few years. And then I joined a band, and then I was off on tour around the world for the next 10 years. You know what I mean? So I didn't have much communication with him other than just popping down there and saying hi at weekends and visiting them with my family and stuff, just in the same way, a lot of kids are with their parents. So to suddenly kind of have him disappear when I was only in my 20s, when he passed away when he was, just barely 60, it was obviously a shock. But I can't say like I felt it as desperately as I would do had I been super close with him. But because of this sort of aura that he had as a father, but also as a musician, I sort of held him, as you said before, like I held him very high in regard. And and I needed to write the book probably to totally understand what that all meant, and of this discovery of all the music was part of that journey, because as you mentioned, I didn't know half of this stuff. The book enabled me. Well, initially the release of a couple of albums that I decided to put out on Bella Union a few years back, like of his work, not
Yeah.
just the all facets of his work, the production, the arrangements, the songwriting, even the singing. There's a track on the album where he sings an absolutely beautiful voice, and I was like, I just didn't know that he could sing. And I'm in my 50s, when I'm discovering all of this stuff about a guy that died when I was in my 20s. So there's a lot of time where I didn't know anything about his work
You,
other than Dusty and, Dusty Springfield, Scott Walker. That's it.
I mean, it's amazing that you had this. I mean, it really is kind of a gift where you suddenly had all this access to all this material, all these tapes, all this footage of your father to go back. I mean, there are so many people that wish they had, that opportunity to review the man's life, post mortem. But I mean, what a gift that was to have access to all of that.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, it's access in a sense. I mean, it wasn't like it was thrust upon me. I mean, I really had to dig around for it.
Sure.
Footage, not really. I mean, the audio. Yes, my mum left a whole box of tapes that she'd recorded him talking about his life. She was going to write a biography of his life. I never really quite got around to it, but she sort of recorded all these tapes of him talking about the events of his life, and that's what she left me when she died. Well, she left it to the family. So, I had the opportunity to go through all of those, and it was at that point I'm like, oh, well, holy shit, there's so much interesting stuff in here, and it's not like he wouldn't have mentioned some of it, but we spent so little time in each other's company that it was just passing comments, or I knew he worked at Dusty Springfield, I knew he worked with the Walker Brothers, I knew he worked with Bowie, I knew he worked with Ian Dury, I knew sort of like 10 important things. But when I started doing the research myself on YouTube in my 50s, where I'm like staying up late at night while my wife was away working, and I was just like thinking about Dad and typing his name into YouTube and just seeing what came up, and then all of a sudden this amazing song would come up on YouTube with like 23 views, and I'd press play and I'd be like, what? That's amazing. And I spent months and months and months doing this and writing them all down and making a catalogue of all these tracks. And sort of, before too long, I had bought them all on Discogs, mint copies of all these out of print, rare 60s 7 inches, most of them on Decca and some of them on Philips, just with bands and artists that I've never heard of before. And it was that point I thought, why don't I put these out? Because I've got a record label. I can do that. So that's what I did. I did one, and it was a double and a really beautiful thing. And then I decided, well, I've got so much stuff still that I think is amazing. I'll do another one. So we did 1 and 2.
It started off by saying that I've been a big fan of the Cocteau Twins for a long time, and like I said, being a fan and then reading about your participation, the story behind it, there are some things that I never realized and would never even considered about the three of you, and that's that you and Robin Guthrie and Elizabeth Fraser, amazingly created this amazing body of work without ever going into the studio with demos, without things specifically written down per se, that you created mostly in the studio with relative efficiency. And considering, the end result and the magnificence of what, finally came out of it, it's amazing that you guys were able to operate that way. There's something magical about your description of it, that it defies a lot of, logic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I suppose, because to me, it didn't seem as extraordinary as it did when I wrote it down and then read it back. And when other people read it and went, really? That's how you did it? And I'm like, yeah, and so what? Because I think for the longest time, we probably didn't realize that other people didn't do the same thing. We just thought it was quite natural. For me, I just started off, I thought, this is a bit weird because we're going in the studio and we don't have any songs. Are you sure? You know, and Robin was like, yes, it'll be cool. Don't worry about it. We've got it covered. So I'm like, okay, guy seems confident. I'll just follow along. And it was hairy. You know, there's no point pretending it wasn't. It was easy. It wasn't always easy. Like certainly Treasure, which was like the first, proper record where I was living in the studio with them and away from home for a few weeks, and my first time really in a posh studio, well not posh, but like a really nice recording studio where you live in and you eat the food and you stay in the studio all at the same time. It was unusual because I was still really young. I'd never done anything in the studio before, and to do it without any songs,
Yeah.
it seemed quite odd. But within a few months, I was like, well, that's what we do, and we didn't find it that difficult, right? So even though we probably could have done with a few more weeks to make those songs a bit better than they were, that just became the norm. This is what we do. We go in, we have nothing, we make shit up as we go along, and actually becomes super fun. And you don't find it like too terrifying. If you found it terrifying, you wouldn't do it, right? You would just be like, we were in the studio for 3 weeks and we couldn't record a note. We mustn't ever do that again. That wasn't the experience. It's like we went in there and we made an album. Okay, it might not have been perfect. I mean, for a lot of people, that is actually their favorite record. So you can't argue with that. Even though we weren't very happy with it at the time, a lot of people loved it. So there's the proof in the pudding, right? People loved it, and therefore we thought, well, we can do this.
I mean, it's very much like almost like a jazz improvisation, the way things kind of came together. I mean, I know it's not that, but I mean, by the description, it's like, well, what do you mean you don't go in with songs, and then to hear the final result, you're like, well, this almost seems impossible. But I mean, that is how it sounds like it is. There's an improvisational element to what you guys were able to do.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I mean, I still work in exactly the same way now, and I don't practice anything before I go in the studio. I don't write anything. I just go in and make it up as I go along. I still find that like still the most exciting way for me to make music. I don't know if I could ever do it with anyone else in the same way. I just think when Robin and I, certainly because the music making was the thing we did together. I don't know. I just think we just had a little magic there between us. I don't know if he would feel the same. I would have to ask him about that. But certainly, maybe to start with, he found it awkward because he'd been doing it himself for Head Over Heels, and prior to that, he would have done it with Will, the previous bass player. So I think he probably found it awkward to start with. Who's this? What's this other guy doing? A bit of a spare part. I felt like a spare wheel. For a good couple of years, because also they're a couple, and walking into a very intimate kind of relationship, and you feel a bit like you're in the way.
Yeah, the third wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think after a while, I sort of stopped worrying about it because I thought, well, if they didn't like me being here,
They wouldn't have you.
No, they'd kick me out. So, I just got on with it and grew in confidence within the group structure, and we stuck right through it, through all the really, really difficult times to come, and I think we made some great records. So I guess the proof is that it can be done, even though most people would say, how the hell did you do that? Really, all we did was just trust each other and just turn the tape machine on and just went with it and not overthink things. I think overthinking music is a terrible idea.
I mentioned the efficiency in which you guys would operate, and what I meant by that, because I mean, I realize there's probably a lot of time in the studio that nothing came out of it, but on the times that you did, if something didn't fit on a particular record, it was either released as a 12-inch single or a 4-song EP. And every one of those that were released were worth listening to. And in most cases, they were some of the most remarkable recordings you guys had put together out of the bunch. And I remember when I was able to get my hands on the Cocteau Twins singles box set for less than $100 on eBay. I thought I had struck the jackpot. I thought that was like, how lucky could I be to get this whole thing at once?
Yeah.
And I sat down and listened to all of it because there was a number of those releases that I never got a chance to listen to. But taken in totality, it's like this is just an absolutely mesmerizingly beautiful body of work that never made the album, which is amazing to me.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly really loved making those singles, and I mean, I thought about it a lot. Like, why between '84 when we made Treasure and 1988 when we released the next proper studio album, Bluebell Knoll? Why was there 4 years in between? But it wasn't 4 years where we were sitting around doing nothing. We were releasing. I think in one calendar year we actually released 33 tracks. I seem to recall counting that up while I was doing the book. You know, there was so many EPs, and these weren't really like afterthoughts. They were like, let's go in and make us an EP. It was really maybe just didn't really 100% feel ready to make an album yet. So we would just make an EP and then go and do some dates, and then let's do another one and do another one. And I think all that while in those 4 years, what we were actually doing without articulating it even amongst ourselves was building up to that moment where we felt ready to make the next record and for it to be significant. And I think Bluebell Knoll, I mean, obviously Moon and the Melodies came right bang in the middle of that, but Moon and the Melodies, sorry, Bluebell Knoll, definitely we were ready to make that record.
Yeah.
We just moved into our own studio for the first time. We'd sort of jettisoned all the things about our past that we were not happy with, working with other producers, working in other studios. And now we had our own key, our own room, our own equipment, no one to kind of tell us, okay, you got to finish now because the money's run out. We didn't have that issue anymore. So we were ready. And I think the EPs between 84 and 88 just helped us, I don't know, maybe solidify our identity a bit more, feel more comfortable with each other. I don't totally know if there's one answer or 100 answers, but it certainly wasn't time wasted. And as you say, some of those songs are absolutely amazing and would happily fit on most records.
You know,
Yeah.
you can't talk about the Cocteau Twins without acknowledging Liz Fraser's voice. To me, it's arguably one of the greatest female voices that's ever been recorded. And there's such an emotional power and vulnerability in the way she sings, which is an incredibly rare gift. And especially when you consider whether or not there are lyrics involved in it or not, or indecipherable lyrics or obscure lyrics, whatever it may be, whatever the song was. You have a unique perspective here, working so closely with her for all those years. As the years have gone on, as time has gone by, how do you look at what she was able to do with her voice? How do you place her after all this time and reflection on it?
Yeah, I mean, probably no higher than I did at the time. I mean, it was always like right up there, as you say, up there with the very, very best, the Nina Simone's, the Billie Holidays, whoever you want to say, whoever your favorite female singer is, Elizabeth Fraser has to be up there because it's a unique voice. No one else is doing what she's doing. Her range is extraordinary. The fact that she is improvising her parts in a similar way that we were improvising ours is like crazy to me. And the fact that she was able to sing a complicated melody and then 5 seconds later repeat it exactly the same to double track it in the studio. I mean, what a gifted person. I mean, a talent that is it's certainly not learned. Girl didn't go to school for this kind of thing. She just had it in there somewhere. And I think being in this band, whether it was initially partially because of the love relationship she had with Robin, it enabled that to flourish in a kind of really natural, empathic way. But even then, when the relationship sort of ended and all the other things kind of messed it all up, she was still such an innovative, brave singer. In many ways, the bravest record, I think, Four Pound the Cafe is the one that she probably, to date anyway, will have the least plaudits for, because I don't think people really appreciate what she was doing on that record. Whereas to me, I think it's like, oh my God, when you listen to what she's singing, the hurt and the pain and the upset and the anger and all the things that she was sort of reacting to that had been going on in her life over the few years prior to that record, that's all there. So when people are like, "Oh, she just sings gobbledygook," I'm like, mate, she doesn't always. There are times where she was singing sort of like nonsense, is the wrong word, but lyrics that are hard to decipher, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not on purpose, sometimes ones that people just think are rubbish, but are actually perfectly legitimate, normal English language. She's just playful. She's treating words, not frivolous, that's the wrong word, in a playful way, wanted to have fun with moving them around on the page, with how they looked, with how they sounded, with how they sounded over the length of a line. I think I said something about that in the book, where maybe the way someone would phrase a very simple lyric in a song, she might spread it out over 12 lines, but it's the same words. She would just
Yeah.
sing it in a way where people go, "What on earth is she singing?" Well, she's singing the same as what you would be singing on that song, but she's singing it in a very unusual way. But I think she went through lots of phases, like we all do when we're growing up and we're learning and absorbing music and living our life. We kind of change, right?
Yeah.
You start off doing it this way, and then you think, maybe I need to adapt it and do something different on the next thing. So you do something different. So I think each record, you see a new phase of Elizabeth Fraser, and everyone will have their favorite Elizabeth Fraser phase. Some people like the chest beating early days, where she had that amazing like wobble in her vocal, and then other people will prefer the kind of slightly more mature things on Bluebell Knoll, and incredible layers of harmonies that she would be doing on Have Las Vegas and stuff. None other people will like the stuff at the end. So you've got plenty to choose from, even though we didn't hang around for much longer than whatever 13 years.
You,
There's enough stuff there, I think, for people to say, yeah, she's one of the greats,
you,
and she is one of the greats, and she still is one of the greats.
you mentioned the word bravery, and I think that's a really appropriate word. I think if you talk to most singers, lyrics are the thing that kind of prop them up. It's kind of like the structure or the for a lot of singers where they rely on the lyrics to remember where am I in this song. The fact that she didn't necessarily rely on specific lyrics all the time really kind of exposes her where what she's singing is an emotional lyric that's just pure emotion and not necessarily words. Like, how complicated must that have been for any vocalist to do, and to pull it off so brilliantly? I think it says a lot about what the level of talent we're talking about here.
Yes, and I think Liz has always been a bit of an enigma and a mystery to a lot of people because she never spoke about it.
Right.
Not she never gave the game away. She never said, "Well, this is what I was doing there, and I did it because I was feeling this." She there were little glimpses here and there, and maybe more so now that time's passed and she's able to look back on it and talk about it a bit more openly than she had done previously when we were in the band. But I mean, we never grilled her about it. We never asked her about it because it just seemed like, well, she's just being an impressionist. She's just singing what's in her heart, and I just think it sounds so amazing that, well, why would I question it? Because I didn't look at lyrics in the same way that a journalist would or a critic would, where they're trying to sort of, what is she going on about? I need to understand the mystery of Elizabeth Fraser. I'm just fucking happy to be here, man, in this
Yeah.
cool band. I don't need to know what she's singing about because I'm sure it's important to her. And that's all that matters, and people who were at shows would be singing along. They didn't know what the words were, but they were singing along, having the time of their life, basically interpreting our thing in their own way. And I thought that was a really beautiful kind of part of our band that is a bit underappreciated. The fact that the lyrics weren't known really, but people were still loving them and putting their own interpretations of them. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
I want to talk to you, kind of switch things up here a little bit. I want to talk about Bella Union for a minute here or two. In the last couple of months, I've interviewed a couple of Bella Union artists. I talked to Leah Stanhope and Jamie Cheller from Congratulations, as well as Ben Easton from Deary. And these are two relatively new artists that have released records this year on Bella Union. And I've talked to a few others too, like Soph Nathan from Our Girl and Sophie Jameson, and they're all amazing. And the more I dig into the story of Bella Union and what it's all about, the more interesting I find it. Not just because it was a label started between you and Robin, but from what I can tell, it does not operate like normal, regular record labels would, and as someone who's had their experience with both, 4AD and Capitol and kind of like a wide swath of different experiences with labels, how would you explain the approach of Bella Union to people?
Um, I mean, in some ways, it hasn't really changed since the very beginning, and in other ways, it's changed so much that I couldn't even begin to explain it. On the one hand, I only will look at an artist that I completely adore, like, and feel sort of like listen to it in an obsessive way. I kind of get obsessed about it and think, oh, I have to put this out. And I did that really from the beginning. I never really thought about sales. Well, streaming didn't exist back then, but when it became a thing, I just don't, and still to this day, I don't even look at it. If a band approaches me, I don't ask them how many streams they have or likes they have or followers they have. I couldn't care less. And I just really only listen to things on sort of musical merit, and really more to the point whether I think, even if I don't think they're amazing yet, I hear something and think, oh, in 3 albums' time, these guys are going to be amazing. I have to have that belief, because otherwise, what would be the point in investing, money and time into a band that you just thought were going to do well for 5 minutes?
Right.
So I have to sort of, even though I'm wrong a lot, I have to sort of believe that that's what's going on when I hear it for the first time. Now, there's been so many variations of that over the 30 years that I've been doing this, that I have fine-tuned it a little bit. Before, I would just sign anything without really even bothering to get to know the people, because I was just like obsessed with this tune. I have to put it out. And then when I realized that you really need to get to know the people, and have a relationship with them in the same way that you would a partner, or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever. You have to have that kind of relationship for it to be reciprocal. Because I've done things too many times where I've sort of like just been disappointed with how it went down, ultimately, or maybe just not taking enough time to get to know the people, and then realizing, oh, I don't really like them. So I'm really much more kind of fussy nowadays about who I sign, and I won't sign anyone. I mean, I'll still get it wrong, of course I will, but I don't sign anyone without spending a lot of time to get to know them. And so I could go back home and go, yeah, they are good people and they get what we're trying to do totally. And I trust them to get on with their thing and work really hard at the same level that we all work really hard. Because when you don't have that balance right, and when you're doing more things for them than they're doing for themselves, you have to go, hold on a minute, this ain't how it should be. It needs to be an equal. There needs to be an equilibrium there. So I think I've worked it out better now. But the music industry is changing so fast; it's hard to keep up, and I don't really recognize it at this present moment in time. So where am I in it right now? I'm just thinking maybe just get back to basics and do exactly what I've always done, which is just keep listening to the music, and if you can help, help. But the investment side has to change, because there's no money in it anymore. No, bands don't. New bands take such a lot of investment to get them up and running, and it's super expensive business. So you have to be very careful.
And it's also an industry that, which in many ways is almost, taking the whole band concept, out of the equation, and it's more expensive to be in a band than to be a solo artist, and that's a very hard balance for anyone who's making music right now.
Yes, it is. And if you look at our roster, and certainly in the last 2 3 years, it's mostly new bands, and I'm not unaware of that. And I am looking around at other labels and thinking, who else is developing new bands? And I can't honestly see that many of my contemporaries now doing that. The labels that I grew up with, like Heavenly or Transgressive, or they all working with kind of older, more established artists. Why? Because they know they have a fan base, and they will sell X thousand records on release, and they will stream, X million streams, and it's less risky. And I understand it 100%.
Yeah.
If you can find those artists, great. But I've kind of gone the other way and tend to, apart from the obvious ones like Mercury Rev and Spiritualized and Flaming Lips, which who I've been working with for a long time, but I do tend to sort of just want to help bands from the beginning, because I know how difficult that bit is, and I think I can help them. but it becomes more increasingly difficult as the years go on, for sure.
There was something in the book that I thought was actually kind of amazing because I don't think it just necessarily is about music or record labels or whatever, but there was an idea of once you get past year 11, things start to turn around, and in your case, after year 11, you're releasing music from the Flaming Lips and Fleet Foxes and some others. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, it may not be year 11, but once you endure and get over the hump on a lot of things, then what you're trying to accomplish does often tend to work out in some way. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the same thing that's worked for me. It's worked for other people. It's actually, it was a really unique idea about year 11.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, he could knock me over with a feather. Like, I was not expecting that. Like, the story in the book is that I was with Lawrence from Domino, and he was telling the story that the day he got the phone call to say that Franz Ferdinand had sold their millionth record. I was like, wow, man, that's so amazing. Because I was like nowhere near having success anywhere near that level. We were selling like 30 or 40,000 mid-late records, and I thought that was pretty good. And then he was talking about like million-selling Franz Ferdinand. I was like, man, that's amazing. How did you do it? And he just said, oh, just wait till the 11th year and just, don't give up and just stick with it. And I was like, weird. That's a weird thing to say to somebody. And it was kind of like a joke, but not a joke. And then 2 or 3 years later, we just hit 1 million records with Fleet Foxes, and I'm like, 2008. Wow, that's our 11th year. That is just weird.
Yeah.
So I called Lawrence up and said, man, you are some kind of sage.
I just thought that was such an interesting part of the story. There's a lot of mention in the book, and you mentioned it before because I know your father had this this relationship too, about your connection with Scott Walker and the Walker brothers, and his story is really fascinating to me. I mean, this is a guy that started off. He was born in the United States. Was spent most of his career in the UK as a pop singer, and then suddenly decides he's going to make avant-garde records. And he was very, very influential, and an amazing voice, an amazing vocalist. But there's connections between you, him, and your dad. Tell me a little bit about Scott Walker and what he meant to you.
Yeah, well, the significance of him obviously started with my dad, because my dad worked with the Walker Brothers on some their biggest hits in the UK anyway. Make it easy on yourself and the Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore. 2 absolutely classic pop songs from the 60s, and for sure I knew who they were and therefore who he was. But I have to also remember that in 1967 I was 5, so my awareness was that of a 5-year-old who had literally no interest in it at all, really, other than just being in the house with 2 older sisters and an older brother who would have been much more interested in it than me. But I certainly knew who Scott Walker was. He came to the house, and of course he was part of my dad's sort of story in my early years. So fast forward through to the 80s, when Julian Cope from the Teardrop Explodes was brought the Scott Walker myth to everybody by showing us that he'd released these incredible records after the Walker Brothers had split up, and he put them on a compilation that we all went and bought, and we were like, oh my God, Scott Walker's incredible. So I'm like, Scott Walker, that's the Scott Walker that my dad worked with. So all of a sudden I'm sort of, these dots are connecting. And then I'm now falling in love with all Scott Walker records. I, bought all the original albums, Scott 1 to 4, bought the Moviegoer. I, started collecting them all, and just sort of began a bit of an obsession with Scott Walker throughout my adult life. And then obviously Bella Union happened, and one thing led to another, and I was in contact with his managers, and they were just super lovely. I'd said, could I maybe do a box set of Scott 1 to 4 and put it all together? And they said, oh, let's ask Scott. And he came back and said, oh, we love the idea. So I started kind of researching it and requesting the tapes from Universal and seeing if I could license them to release on Bella Union. This is. And then the manager came back and said, oh, listen, Universal have actually come back and said that they want to do it themselves. So I was a bit disappointed, but then when I saw the box set later the following year, I was actually really impressed with it. It was really beautifully done. So that had already, now my relationship with them was sort of underway. So I was in touch with them, and that felt really lovely. And they were really nice and kind about the Bella Union and things like that. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I didn't think much of it. And then this opportunity to curate the BBC prom for Scott Walker came up in 2017, I think it was. I have a friend who's a journalist in Holland who shares my love and obsession with Scott Walker. And we talked about it for years. Like, wow, it'd be so cool to do like a sort of series of concerts with some of the cool singers that are around these days covering Scott songs. And we talked about it a bunch. And then all of a sudden, this call came in from the BBC, like, would you like to be involved with the prom? Now, the prom is basically, for those that don't know, the BBC proms are something that happens at the Royal Albert Hall every year for like a month. And it's mostly classical concerts using the BBC Philharmonic and the BBC concert orchestras, you know, doing versions and using conductors. And it's a passionate, wonderful affair where they open the seats up and people stand up and wave flags, and it's fun, you know, it's a fun thing. But then at the end of every prom, they do something that's a bit off skew, a bit different. Like one year they did the BBC the prom of David Bowie. I think they've done other iconic artists, and this time they wanted to do Scott Walker, and for whatever reason they decided to involve me. And it was amazing to be part of, really, really amazing to be part of. And I thought Scott wouldn't be remotely interested in it because of his, I don't know, his sort of reticence to kind of go there. You know what I mean? He's so into his own modern career at this point, you know, releasing all these amazing records on 4AD like Tilt and Bish Bosh and stuff. And he just didn't seem somebody that would really be interested in rehashing and being involved in a rehashing of his past. So I didn't think he would want to be involved. And to be honest, I don't think the managers were sure either. And I said, you know, we started the whole process and we found 4 singers that he was happy with, that I would, you know, I helped curate and put this whole thing together. And the evening sort of happened, and I'd said to his managers, like, do you think he'll come? You know, do you think he'll come along to the show? And they went, well, probably not, but like, we don't really know. He's quite undecided on these things. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but best to keep in 10 tickets just in case. So that's what we did, kept in 10 tickets. I sat through the show next to my wife, and I just spent the whole time like looking around, seeing if I could see some shadowy figure, hiding under a baseball cap, as he's wont to do. But I didn't enjoy the show at all because I was just too nervous, considering he might be there and what might he think of it. But as it turned out, I went backstage afterwards to say hi to some of our friends and people that were involved in the show, and walked into John Grant's dressing room. He's an artist on Bella Union. He was one of the singers. And there, standing there, is Scott Walker with his
Amazing.
family. And I'm like, oh my God. Because I've never met him before and I've never spoken to him, only spoken to him through his management, you know. And it was always like, Scott really wants you to know that this must happen. And Scott says it's got to be super powerful. And Scott says this. And I'm like, cool, we'll make sure it happens. And then suddenly to be confronted with him, like literally 2 yards in front of me in the dressing room was amazing. And I said, did you enjoy it? And he went, oh, it was absolutely amazing. And I think I could have just happily passed away then, and that would have been the end of it. But it isn't the end of it. It's sort of, Father John Misty did a concert with all his songs recently that I was involved with. So it's a gift that keeps on giving. That's absolutely for sure.
Yeah.
And you know, it is a hugely important part of my story now because of what's happened in the last few years with his songs, and that somehow, I don't know how it happened, but it just does tie beautifully back into the work that my dad did with him, or whatever it was, 60 years,
Yeah.
50 years ago. It's weird.
You know, it is weird, but you know, there are so many things that get tied up in your story in this book between you, your dad, some of the artists that you had. in common, and it just makes for an amazing story. It really is one of the better memoirs that I've read, because it starts off punching you right in the face, and it ends that way too, and it's just beautifully done.
Oh, listen, I really do appreciate that, and I'm certainly really happy with it. It was hard to finish it, to know how to structure it in some ways. The Ivor Raymonde part was actually the most difficult part. It's because really, the publisher was like, why was I where should we put this? And he was like, yeah, I don't know, because I said, really, in a way, chronologically, it should go at the beginning, before my story, because he came before me, therefore. But I don't think that works. And he was like, no, I don't think it works either, because most people reading this who are Cocteau Twins fans will be bored by that part of the story if it's delivered to them at the beginning, because they'll just be wanting to get to the Liz Fraser bits. And I'm like, yeah, totally, I get that. But I also don't want to just start with that, because then that's sort of, I don't know, that they don't get to know me. So that's why I started it with the brain tumor bit, and then kind of slowly edged my way into the Cocteau's thing. And then it's like, where do I put the Ivor Raymonde bit? And it took a while to get that right. But once I got it right, I think it was easy to finish, because then the Scott Walker thing had to come after that. And then I thought, you know what? That is a really beautiful way to end the book, because it's super positive. It's kind of up to date in a way, it's as up to date as it could possibly be with Father John Misty, with Scott Walker.
Yeah.
And I'm happy with that being the end of my life, let alone being the end of my book. So seemed appropriate to me.
Well, thankfully, there's more life yet to come, so that's the good part. Simon, this has been an absolute joy to talk to you today. Like I said, I love the book. I've loved your work for forever, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, thanks, Mike. It was a pleasure for me too.
Absolutely. Simon, thank you so much.
All right, man. Take it easy.
You too. Bye-bye now. The name of Simon Raymonde's book is called In One Ear, The Cocteau Twins, Ivor and Me. It is an exceptional book, a great story. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, and Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.